What's good, guys? So I'm so excited to break down this sample. This has been one of my favorites from recently, and the way it just kind of starts, and it's like a spaceship that's taking off, and then with some really sick vocal layers that I've processed and added a bunch of cool effects to. I really love this sample, so let's get into it. I'm going to show you all the VSTs, plugins and effects that I use to create this. So let's get to it. So I'm going to begin with the intro, and it sounds like this.
You have to understand how things are up here.
So the first layer that I really started with was this chord progression, and I used this preset called I Love Myself from the AYN bank, and it sounds like this. So you can see here the notes are quite close together, same on this one. That's just creating a bit more tension, and it just sounds so awesome. And as always, you can tell I've moved the notes slightly. In fact, I think these I recorded in, so these weren't just perfectly quantized to the grid. These were, made to sound human. And all I did was added some reverb, added RC20, and this I didn't do much to, but just expanded the width a bit. Got some of that like vinyl crackle sound. And yeah, all I did was then just did some EQ curves, boosted a lot of these kind of like high mids. Because it is so mid focused, it didn't matter too much that I boosted almost 5 dB on the highs, but it just helped bring out a little bit more of that shine. And the next layer is the sub bass, which I use this Mini V by Arturia. I love this VST, and it's the Foundations Crumble. I don't think I messed too much with any of the parameters here, but it's a really simple progression, and it just sounds like this. It just has this, kind of haunting sound to it. And it complemented very nicely, especially because there's a lot of the mids in this pad. Like it's taking up a lot of those low mids. So having a more subby bass, like really in that low end, with a little bit of distortion on this like bus 8 that I've got, and a bit of chorus on the bus 11, the pad sits nicely, whereas a lot of distorted synth basses are gonna take up that kind of like mid-range a lot. So if you have a pad also in the mid-range, they just end up kind of fighting. So if I have something like a piano or a pad that's kind of sitting a lot in those low mids, then I want a sub bass or something that's just like really just kind of taking up that low end as opposed to like a lot of the frequency range. And then these 4 layers, which came from one recording I was so excited about. I had just gotten my Moog Grandmother, and I forgot to mention in my last video I said that now I would have the Moog Grandmother, which I do, and I've been using it, and it's been so much fun to play on something analog. There's just such a novelty to actually like flicking different knobs and just tweaking things with your hands, as opposed to, the way you do, say, for example, on like some VSTs. It's like, I would love to have these VSTs, and at one point I will in analog form, but it's just not the same like clicking and dragging on different parameters, as opposed to like playing a note and then being able to adjust. Anyway, all of that to say that's what I did for this layer, and I just chopped it a little bit. So the only difference is that the pitch is changing in these chops, as well as a bit of the reverb and I think some delay. So this is what these layers sound like. And that fade right at the end, so that, like, really builds that anticipation into the next section. Yeah, so this is just a guitar chop from a portion that's coming up later in the sample, and it's just reversed to add to the swell. So yeah, that with this. And with that delay carrying over. And then I have this vocal, which is just talking. It's nothing melodic, but I did add Little Altar Boy pitching up the formant, so it sounds a bit higher in pitch. I added some reverb with a really high mix, to be honest, but a very short delay. So it sounded very intimate in a closed room. Same with the EQ on the reverb, just being, you know, in a very smaller range. So it's not like drowned out and super atmospheric. I wanted it to sound kind of like someone's on the radio talking to you. And it's this vocal I just took from Splice without any plugins. It sounds like this.
You have to understand how things are up here.
I just thought that was cool. And I said this in my last video, but I just want to integrate more things like this, different sounds, talking, ambiences that just stand out. I've got a sample that I want to do a breakdown of that I made recently, which has a lot of sounds from office spaces, like different machines and like paper noises that just worked so well. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's for the next video. So going into the next section.
You have to understand how things are up here.
Okay, so this section, it's, oh my God, I love this sample so much. So I'm gonna start with this vocal layer first, and it's very subtle. It was something I was working with at first, but then I realized it worked better as kind of a background layer, so. So I'd already kind of chopped it a little bit, and then I added Portal. But if I have Portal on, I'm using the 4th shape pan. And that's just giving it that rhythmic chop, like I always say. But then I've added this distortion, this American Plexi amp. This is one of my presets in FabFilter Saturn, which is just saturation, distortion, EQ, cutting out 500 Hertz. Just help contain it. It's still quite distorted sounding, but it worked in the context of the sample, because the next thing I have is this synth. And this synth phrase came from London Rain, one of his recent packs, the Clang D08. And I've just pitched it up to match the sample. I've added quite a lot of reverb, and this time with a large delay or a long delay, just so it does sound very like out there and wide. And man, by the way, Pete, the new microphone is so nice. I can like move around. I don't have the old one in the way. Anyway, I'm cutting out a lot of the lows up to 1000 Hertz on the EQ. I've added more distortion, the same thing, the FabFilter Saturn, and I've added delay, just the stock Logic delay, and some multi-band compression, which I cannot stress how important this plugin has been for me in terms of cleaning up my mixes, because it's one thing to use an EQ and obviously like duck and boost different areas, but doing it with compression, I just find I've been able to just have different layers and tracks sit comfortably in different frequency ranges and just kind of compress them so that it's like, okay, this is here, you know, whilst of course they bleed a little bit into each other so it sounds more natural. But yeah, just definitely use a multi-band compressor and experiment with it in your mixes. It will help bring so much more clarity to your tracks. Definitely has for mine. So this is what the synth sounded like without any of the plugins. It's not too different. Kind of sounds like a fire raid's going on. It's just like a very ambient, droney synth sound, and yeah, obviously pitching it up with the reverb, cutting out all the lows. And also, as you can see, the multi-band compressor, I've got the expand setting on, so it's expanding and widening that high end. And yeah, it just helps it really create atmosphere in this sample. I've got the pad continuing, except without the bass notes. So same as before, but it's just higher and yeah, doesn't have those bass notes playing. So, and before I get to the main vocal that comes in this section, I want to just look at this electric sharp texture that I've got. So it's a very sharp, like kind of shiny, glitchy texture that just sits in the really like the high end of this track. Okay, and here I have the main vocal. I love this vocal and I love finding ones like this that I just kind of feel like belong to a different genre, but then end up sitting so well in these samples. And that's just the beauty and thing I love about sample making and making music, is just finding things from different worlds and bringing them together and like just making just something sick. Anyway, so this is what the vocal sounded like.
One more prick, come up and I'm done. Yeah, this is a playground, but I ain't having fun. Test me, that's it, face the tip of my gun. I'ma pop this baby like bubble gum.
Super, super cool vocal. Very like pop alternative. I pitched it down 7 semitones so that it matched the project. I only added a little bit of compression on this RVox, and then the reverb, again, similar to the first vocal with the talking, I have a really high mix, but a very small and short delay. So now it sounds like this.
One more prick, come up and I'm done. Yeah, this is a playground, but I ain't having fun. Test me, that's it.
And again, peep the EQ here. I've got it going only up to 1600 Hertz. If I was to crank it up, check this.
One more prick, come up and I'm done. Yeah, this is a playground, but I ain't having fun. Test.
Like that works, but now it's kind of jarring how much of the frequency range it's taking up, and especially when, keep in mind that synth from earlier is already sitting in the high end, and then the electric guitar sharp texture that I've got is like really in the high end. So if I have the vocal EQ expanding all the way there as well, now it begins to clash, and we don't want that. So that's why I brought it down, and it was, I believe, at 1600. And yeah, so that's the reverb. I also brought the width down a little bit here, so it's just a little bit closer. Oh wow, I didn't use the 4-shape pan. I used this Alien Soul Shifter preset, so that sounds like this.
One more prick, come up and I'm done. Yeah, this is a playground, but I ain't having fun. Test.
Right, so I can kind of hear it like modulating it, like shifting it a little bit up and down. So yeah, that's pretty cool. EQ, just cleaning it up. Some RC20, some compression, really just like cranking this thing, and a little bit of multi-band compression again. And yeah, I just think the vocal sounded really good in this context. And don't underestimate the power of these little gaps, because just having more of that chop effect works really well in samples, especially once you come around to adding drums. Man, they'll just have so much more impact on the one when there's just that like space beforehand. Okay, so now going into the next part of this section, there's some really cool little like vocal processing that happens, so check this out. Super, super cool. And actually the vocal processing here is really, really simple. So I'm just going to start with this first layer that's been introduced here. And I believe this was actually what I started the sample with and was trying to build it around. So it's kind of funny how I added a bunch of things and then ended up pushing it more towards like a later part of the sample without any plugins. You can see it's from Lacevis, I don't know how to say his name, but his packs are amazing. And let me clarify that I've already chopped this and time stretched it a little bit, but this is essentially what the phrase sounded like. And you can hear the timing is like a little bit off, and it was annoying because I really liked this phrase and I appreciated that it had this human feel to it, but I did try time stretching it out. But then what I did, which I was probably going to do anyway, but I tend to do if I'm trying to force a rhythm or rhythmic modulation, is added halftime, and I just did a full wet mix. So now it sounds like this. So that kind of helped get over the weird little like tempo changes that were slightly happening, EQing out the lows up to 500, added more EQ, cutting up to about the same amount. So now it's like nice and a bit thin sounding. It just sits a lot more ambiently, if that's a word. It's more ambient, yeah. And just a little bit of reverb and even more EQ up to 750. So yeah, it was sounding pretty thin at this point, but it just helped kind of make this section a bit more tame and just like, because the previous section, you've got the synth, you've got the bass, like the vocals are playing. Now it's just like, so it's just like, it's a little bit more subtle and I really like that. So yeah, I have that same sub bass playing. So then I have this synth arpeggio or synth art playing, and basically all I did was take, I'm pretty sure the same chord progression, maybe added a couple notes, and it was on this Prophet 5 VST, also by Arturia, and it's the growth preset. I think I adjusted some of the knobs, probably a lot of the cutoff, so it wasn't like taking up a bunch of the high end and sounding really distorted. And then I added the arpeggiator within Logic. Don't sleep on this if you use Logic. I don't use it super often, but I do find it very helpful for creating variation. So quite literally, I added the variation here, so it wasn't just the same arpeggio repeating, and just kept it in the same octave range with a bit of delay and some reverb, so it sounded like this. Actually, first I'm going to play it without the arpeggiator, so it's a very nice sound. So when I added the arpeggiator, it sounded like this. But the thing is, like you heard there, the arpeggiator kind of like went over a lot of those high notes and it just didn't sound great. So that's why I've just chopped it. So I've repeated it. Bit of compression. So I think that chop just worked really well. And then, yeah, I just bring in the same layers from before, but this is where I have the vocal processing happening. So check this out. So I have the main vocal, and all I did was I just wanted a little bit of variation, and sometimes it's as simple as this. It sounds complicated, it sounds like, whoa, there's these crazy chops happening, but actually all I did was take that one bit, move it to a new track. I tend to do this instead of automation because at least in Logic I find the automation just a bit clunky and annoying to use. So I tend to just stick it on a brand new track, and all I did was just use Little Altar Boy. I pitched down the formant 3.5, added delay, so you get this. I also don't have a lot of these plugins, EQs and stuff from before, so this is just a nice kind of call and response. It just sounds very different.
One more break, come up and I'm done. Yeah, this is your playground and I have fun. Man, that's it.
So taking the same bit there, putting it onto that track, and then here I've just basically done the same thing, but I've just chopped it into quarters, and they're not perfect chops, but that gives it a little bit more of a human feeling in that chop. And using Little Altar Boy again, but this time pitching the formant up, so this cool call and response. And then I've also got the panning going in opposites, so these cuts are going one way, these are going another. So there's just a lot of cool back and forth and kind of call and response in this section with the vocals. Again, it really is simple processing. It's just taking snippets from that sample, putting it on a separate track, and just doing something different with that track. And that just creates such a cool call and response. And you can do that with pretty much any instrument. And so then it leads into the final section, which just sounds like this. So that was just like a really weird kind of quirky transition that I found, and all I did was I took the sub bass and I just chopped it. I ended up pitching it up 12, I nearly said 12 octaves, imagine that. I pitched it up 12 semitones and I added the Portal preset shifting drops, and this just gave it a bit of a kind of cool pitched glitch texture. And I have an EQ that's not really doing much, but it just sounds like this. So just like gave it a bit of a like stutter along with the vocal, which I just took a different chop, but using that same kind of delay. And then I have this little phrase here, which I just added some delay really, and a little bit of tremolo, just the stock one in Logic, and it sounds like this. A bit of a weird and goofy layer, if I'm honest. But the thing I found about this layer, even though it's a little bit goofy sounding, I think it just introduced some contrast into what is already a very kind of ambient, subdued section. This just gave it a bit more contrast, a bit of light. And so I feel like that kind of transitioned nicely. It was just like a breath of like a little pocket breath of fresh air, just transitioning into, again, a more ambient section. So yeah, I think it works pretty cool. And I hope if there's something you can take away from this video and this sample breakdown is to experiment with instruments and tracks and layers and textures from different genres and just mix and match and make them work. There's so many different flavors in different genres, whether it's like Latin or jazz or classical, and all of them can be combined in so many different ways to create something brand new. So please, I implore you to try and do that. And the final thing I want to say is don't be afraid to experiment with call and response. It doesn't have to be technical. The example I have here in the sample with the vocals, doing these little cool stutter effects and going back and forth, is really simple to do. It's simply creating an automation and changing one of the plugins on the call and then the response, or just creating a new track and just altering the plugins on it so that when it's going along, it just gives you a cool, refreshing kind of 3D effect in your samples. And it's such an easy way to add kind of a little splash of nuance or complexity, which will just give you more depth in your samples, your compositions. It'll sound more interesting. It'll sound more expert, if you will. And yeah, it's just really, really fun to experiment. And especially when you nail it or get a cool kind of back and forth between two tracks, sometimes even more than that. If you want access to this exact sample and you want to make a beat with it, flip it, chop it, do whatever you want with it, the link is in my description. You can join my Discord server. I post all my samples now on there. I also have channels for discussion. You can share your samples, your beats, anything you want for feedback. If you want to purchase any of my sounds, my compositions, I have a very large collection of my best samples on my store, as well as accent and phrases, all that good stuff. You can check that out. And until then, I'll see you in the next one, guys. Peace.
One more